Okay, we're going to dumb this down for the rest of the people who can. We're spouting nonsense as you're coming in. I think we want this mic a little more centered and aimed. And right at Michael.
Right.
Maybe slide it over about a foot to my right.
Oh,
The whole cushion. Yeah. A little more even with the room. Good, thanks. So somebody wants to do the timing bell. Please pick up the little bell. Couple of quick announcements while we're settling in. We've got a board of directors meeting today at 12:30. Mike Goldman is on his way back from Jacksonville, where he just happened to get a concert to the Rolling Stones, or a ticket to a Rolling Stones concert. I said, well, of course you couldn't pass that up. Turns out he grew up in Jacksonville. We have an affiliate there. I can't remember the name of the last Rolling Stones concert I saw, the one and only.
They were at New Orleans Jazz Fest this year.
Really?
I missed it.
They were here once, many years ago, and I saw them. So anybody's welcome to join that, and you can get up and leave anytime. We also have people join us online, typically, from the Silent Thunder Order affiliates. We're trying to merge the two boards so they function basically as one and get it down to one meeting. Typically, the STO board meets online the third Thursday, and then this board meets the third Sunday. But those don't, sometimes the third Sunday is not preceded by the third Thursday, believe it or not. If you look at the calendar, there's some anomalies. So we're trying to figure it out so we can get it down to one meeting everybody can attend, if not in person, online. And we do have openings on the board. Zena, I think you just recently started picking up the secretarial note-taking, and she just started that. She didn't even ask. She just said, well, oh, we got a secretary. It's a small board here. Brian is on it. Laurel is on it. Brennan is on representing the residents. And the reason we're trying to merge is we have a lot more people in the STO, and many of them are retired or semi-retired, so they have more time and freedom to devote, and some maturity in some cases. Whereas it's always been a half a dozen people here struggling to keep everything, all the balls in the air around here. So more and more of the online responsibilities, things have shifted over to the larger network. It's kind of like, think of it as an umbrella, about a dozen affiliates or so. And both boards are collaborating and managing the forward process. So they take up a lot of the slack on designing retreats and scheduling and things of that nature. But we can always use more people on the board here. You're welcome to come and sit through it and see if your cup of tea. If you're new, if you're relatively new, we don't encourage you to do that because it can become kind of substitution effect for practice. You get a little too engaged in the board level, right, and the community level. This starts slipping. Another personal plug, there's some little sheets of paper out on the front with my picture on it. I've got a little booth at the Paris en Ponce, and some of my furniture designs. Some art pieces can be sold there. I can't compete with the Yukai's gallery, but some of the pieces he would not sell. Like there's a big American flag piece that's up there. It's called the rainbow flag because it has the American flag in red and blue and white, you know, blue field stars and red stripes. But then another one is the stars are in red field and the stripes are blue, and has every other possible color combination of all the yellow, you know, primaries and secondary colors. So it's called the rainbow flag. And furniture and some furnishings like incense offering, incense bowls and things of that nature. So if you ever want to drop by Paris en Ponce, Pick up a little pamphlet. Anything else we should announce that we didn't announce? We forgot to announce before.
Just this Saturday next week.
Just that Saturday is 2 weeks. Next week is 4th. This is the 3rd.
Next is,
And the 4th week we do a contemporary teaching.
yes, the 3rd, the
That was
12th.
on the second. Missed it on the second Saturday.
Yeah, second Saturday, so it'll be the 12th.
Yeah, every second Saturday is the Just It Saturday from 9 to 4. And, we do have something new. And the Sunday is the Sangha dialogue, and we've been trying to serve lunch on both of those days. So lunch and learn on Saturday, and Gyoji Robert Atkinson runs those, and he kind of selects a subject to talk about at lunch that day.
Peter mentioned there's something else going on. Is there some retreat that y'all are doing at the same time? In August?
In August, that includes a full day Friday,
Okay.
which is a training retreat mainly for our affiliate leaders to come into town to train.
Okay.
And the training this time is around how to lead a ceremony. So our affiliates need to know how to do Jukai initiation ceremony. They need to know how to do the service. Eventually, startups, when you first start up, you don't need to know that stuff. So that'll be in August. And then August 3rd, which is the first weekend, we have a new yoga instructor who's going to give a mindfulness meditation and yoga retreat here, and it starts at 9 that morning, goes till 5, right? And April is going to be our representative. She's going to take the class and represent the Zen Center. Not that we don't trust Tiffany, but this is a new program for us, so we'll have one of our people here. So if you're into yoga, and if it works out, she has her own following, and she gives yoga classes in a lot of different locations. She's about in her mid-30s, but she looks like 20. Sensei used to say, Zen keeps the men younger and the women more beautiful. So yoga does that too, I guess. So are we started?
Oh, yeah, then started.
Oh, so somebody ring the bell? The Dharma opening verse 3 times. And the stop. The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth. Also wanted to mention that Annie has taken point on a women's committee within the Sangha to look at our programs and see if they would like to make any recommendations and anything additional. Yay. One of the first things, one of our board, when we first convened the board of directors back in I guess it was the 80s, we were in Candler Park, the chairman of the board, the first thing he did was he named a women's committee. And they came back and reported to the board, and then we made several changes because of their recommendations. The men were dominating the dialogue, and the women were politely not interrupting, all the usual stuff. So anything further before we start? Anybody? Okay, so today I want to revisit Genjokoan. Genjo means something like every day or something. I'm not sure. Gen sometimes means I. Anyway, well, maybe they have the definition here. Koan means illogical riddle. The sound of two hands clapping. What is the sound of one hand? This is a koan invented by Hakuin, we understand. Sometimes made fun of by comedians. And we don't do koan practice in Soto as such. It's just a very difficult teaching method. We rely mainly on Zazen. We think we're sitting in the koan. When we're sitting in Zazen, we're sitting in the koan of everyday life. So Genjokoan means something like that, the true koan, or the koan of everyday life. And it's an excerpt out of Bindawa. Now, this is book number 1 of the Nishijimen Cross translation, very scholarly, lots of footnotes every page, lots of appendices and so on. 4 volumes this size, the whole thing. That gives you an idea of how much rice paper must have been consumed in the original writing. This was all written by Dogen in the 1200s. And the piece that we use in the liturgy, which we recite once in a great while, we don't do it very often, is called Genjokoan, and it's an excerpt from part of Bendo Wa. Bendo Wa means something like, Ben means to make an effort, to pursue, Do means the truth, and Wa means a talk or story. So something like a talk about the way. And Dogen chose it to be the very first fascicle or chapter in his masterwork. So the Genjokoan picks up somewhere around the 4th page here and goes to the end where there are a bunch of questions, if I recall correctly. Yeah, someone asked, must the person who's devoted to this Zazen always adhere spotlessly to the precepts? I say, he says, Dogen, keeping the precepts and pure conduct are the standard of the Zen lineages and the usual habit of Buddhist patriarchs. But those who have not yet received the precepts or who have broken the precepts are not without their share of the benefit of Zazen. So he has all these questions that apparently had come up over the time, or he just made all these up and answers them at the end. So the Genjokoan is that section in the middle. Well, what I'd like to do today, I'm setting some of these, I've set a bunch of these pieces to music, as you know, so I have the Genjokoan pretty well memorized. So what I will do is I will quote the version that we use in the service book, which is different from this one, and ask you to follow in a oral response with me. That is, try to say it as I say it. Don't wait until I finish a sentence or a phrase. Just try to say it with me, and I'll go slow. And then I will read this translation. And so in your mind, you can compare the two. You can see what you hear different, okay? So it's a little brain bending, this approach, but it's one of our ongoing efforts to illustrate that memorization, recitation, chanting, all of these were mnemonic ways of learning this teaching from the beginning. Nothing was written down for the first 400 years or so. And so you literally had to go hear somebody recite it in order to hear it, right? That's why it's called, the early teachers were called those who were enlightened by hearing the Dharma, right? So the version I know starts out, now all ancestors and Buddhas, all ancestors and all Buddhas who uphold Buddha Dharma have made it the true path of enlightenment to sit upright, practicing in the midst of self-fulfilling samadhi. Those who achieved enlightenment in India and China followed this way. It was done so because teachers and disciples personally transmitted this excellent method as the essence of the teaching. Okay, got that? The sutras say that the many patriarchs and the many Buddhas who dwelt in and maintained the Buddha Dharma all relied on the practice of sitting erect in the samadhi of receiving and using the self, and esteemed this practice as the right way to disclose the state of realization. Human beings who attained the truth in the Western heavens and Eastern lands followed this style of practice. This practice relies on the mystical and authentic transmission of the subtle method from the master to disciple, and the disciple's reception and maintenance of the true essence of the teachings. Okay? Do you want to repeat the first one?
What we just did.
The one? Okay. So, what did you hear? Did you catch any changes? Did you catch anything?
What about the mystical piece of it? Coming on the mystical.
Yeah, it relies on the mystical and authentic transmission of the subtle method from master to disciple. Well, this is a translator's choice. And you can hear these translators used a whole lot more words to say the same thing as in the chanting version, right? And here I would think, if you think of what they're talking about a method.
Mhm.
How many methods do you know? Like you know how to drive a car, right? Is there anything mystical about that method? I mean, it does pollute the atmosphere and it's destroying the climate. I guess that's mystical, right? But we could say in general, there are a lot of methods we can learn that are not really mystical, right? They're practical. And I know how to build this podium. I can build this. I know how to cut the wood and glue it together.
Do you think that?
But this method
Mhm.
is somehow mystical. So what does that mean?
Is it like my kid is asking me now, like, how do you drive? Explain how to drive.
How do you walk?
But she thinks it's mystical.
Right.
And, you know, that we're driving this thing.
Or at least it's mysterious.
Yeah, she doesn't understand it. So is that the same thing? We don't, it looks mystical until you just sit there long enough and realize it.
Well, I'm looking to you to explain what he means by mystical. What would you say?
Just
Alex.
for
Alex.
clarification, I thought it was the transmission that was mystical. So it's like,
Well, he calls it the transmission of the subtle method from master to disciple. Now, when he says subtle, that means there's nothing subtle about the sitting in this posture, right? I mean, anybody can figure this out and do it. So that can't be the whole of the method. Just sitting still can't. Right? But as we say, sit still enough, long enough, everything changes. So there's a subtle dimension going on here, as well as a mystical dimension, as well as a clear, simple physical dimension, right?
Me, the mystical is the not being able to know it.
Not being able to know, what is the meaning of this method, or what is the purpose or point.
I mean, in reading
don't
the
know.
Tao Te Ching, I mean, it states if you can describe the Tao, then you clearly don't understand the Tao,
Right.
which is in itself is a mystery.
Right, right. And that's not just a play on words. That's actually the truth. Anybody else on that one? There's more.
Oh, yeah.
So, how can anybody here who's been practicing with me for some time really make the claim that I transmitted this subtle method to you? It says here, this practice relies on the mystical and authentic transmission of the subtle method from master to disciple. Can anybody really claim that I transmitted this to you as a disciple? There's only a couple of disciples here. But
So I'm looking at them.
That's what I'm looking at.
don't look at me.
Waiting on your answer, Brian.
No, you can teach the method, but the transmission is something beyond. It's beyond teacher to disciple. The actual insight is beyond.
So to Alex's point, it's sometimes referred to as transmission of mind with a capital M to mind with a small m. So it means that in the metaphor that's used in the transmission of the lineage from master to student, here he's talking about the transmission of the method, which I think is a different point. Chicken pecking at an egg, and the chick is pecking at the egg shell from the inside. Both pecking at the same shell of ignorance, you might say, and when it shatters, they're both in the same reality. So that's how transmission is described as a metaphor, analogy. Well, nothing transmits from the teacher to the student, but something happens in the exchange where they both come to accord, or they have the same kind of understanding. You could hardly claim that any two people, have the same understanding. It would be like you'd have to have the same brain or something. Okay. So in the authentic transmission, this is a recitation, in the authentic transmission of our teaching, in the authentic tradition of our teaching, in the authentic tradition of our teaching,
It
it is said
is said
that this directly transmitted, straightforward Buddha Dharma is the unsurpassable of the unsurpassable. Okay, we'll stop right there. Hang on to that one. In the authentic transmission of our religion,
Are we starting again?
no, I'm reading.
Okay.
In the authentic transmission of our religion, and you want to hear it in context of what we just said, it is said that this Buddha Dharma, and they have a footnote to explain what he means by it here, means Buppo, or Buddhist method, in this case means Zazen itself. Okay. In the authentic transmission of our religion, it is said that this Buddha Dharma, which has been authentically and directly transmitted one-to-one, is supreme among the supreme. You hear the difference there?
No, but the reason I don't hear the difference is because with the call response, I feel like I'm focusing so much on what you're saying
Yeah.
that I don't
Yeah.
comprehend what I'm saying.
Okay, let's do it again. In the authentic,
No, I'm just going to say it's true.
now we are oral. Here we are. In the authentic tradition of our teaching, it is said that this directly transmitted, straightforward Buddha Dharma is the unsurpassable of the unsurpassable. Reading. In the authentic transmission of our religion, not tradition, of our teaching, in the authentic transmission of our religion, it is said that this Buddha Dharma, which has been authentically and directly transmitted one-to-one, is supreme among the supreme. Translator choices.
The surpassable and supreme for one.
Unsurpassable versus supreme. And the authentic tradition of our teaching compared to the authentic transmission of our religion. And many people insist that Zen is not a religion. Right. I'm writing, the last two Dharma Bites were at the intersection of science and Zen last month, and the one coming out now. And the next one is going to be at the intersection of God and Buddha. To get at this point. When we say Vairochana Buddha, cosmic Buddha, are we really talking about the same thing as God? I mean, is it just semantics?
What's the answer?
You have to read the Dharma Bite. You have to buy the book. Okay, so let's see. The first time you meet a master, without engaging in incense burning, incense offering, bowing, chanting Buddha's name, repentance, or reading scripture, you should just wholeheartedly sit and thus drop away body and mind. Think about that one? After the initial meeting with a good counselor, we never again need to burn incense, to do prostrations, to recite Buddha's name, to practice confession, or to read sutras. Just sit and get the state which is free of body and mind.
Okay, I hear something. The word never, I think, is extreme.
We never again need to do this.
I mean, it's one thing to say don't, or shouldn't have to. The word never that's a pretty hard.
Never say never.
Yeah, and and I think the difference between one of the differences between being adolescent and adult is that word never, because children use it a lot. It's like you're never nice to me, kind of thing, or you never let me play outside. Children
Right.
use that word a lot. Adults tend to recognize the infinity of the word.
It's interesting that you bring up the adolescent or the child, because there's a little anecdote about this seeming conflict where the unsui, un means cloud, like my Dharma Italian great cloud. Unsui means water. So the unsui are young people who come to the monastery to train. And I don't know if they were like a finishing school for kids or something. Unsui means very malleable, like clouds and water, And so the abbot has a meeting with them when they first come. And he tells them, he says, now don't go imitating the priests around here. Oh, okay. probably causes a lot of trouble. And so then later they see him doing the vows and doing the incense offering and the chanting and everything. And have another meeting with him, I guess, when they leave. And they say, wait a minute, you said, don't go imitating the priests around here. And we see you're doing all the same stuff. And he said, this is simply the way I have my devotion. So his message to them was, don't imitate. He wasn't imitating, something like that. But this issue comes up. It says, why don't we just sit? Why do we have to do anything else? And I think that there's a simple way of thinking about it. There's a personal level of practice, right? That you do in a cave by yourself. And then there's a social level of practice that you do with others, Sangha practice. So in the case of Sangha practice, on the social level, you behave differently at work than you do at home, right? Depending on the social circle you're in, you behave differently and hopefully appropriately, right? But people come here, they're on their best behavior. Who knows what they're like at home, right? Including me. So on a social level, of course, there may come occasions where it's appropriate to burn incense and chant, right? But for you, for your enlightenment, for your insight, you don't need that stuff, right? Now, there's psychological situations like the old man who never wanted to undergo initiation. When he was in his 80s, he finally went to a monastery and went through the initiation. Said when they put the vestment on him, that was what was missing all along. So when you say need, it's kind of like the word never. We don't need to do this. You have to finish that statement. We don't need to do this in order to do what? We don't need to do zazen. If you want to make the argument, right? How could it be possible that we need to do zazen?
I wonder, maybe this is just semantics, but when it's talking about you don't need to do this ever, maybe it's focusing more on the part that's the you, right? Because it's like with sitting initially takes conscious, like there's a conscious effort. Now I'm going to go sit, and eventually it becomes habitual. And I think maybe with the lighting incense and all of the things that go on, when you first come in, you're busy trying to make sure that you put your hands together the right way here, do this the right way, and you walk the right way when you do walking meditation, and everything is, there's a lot of talking going on in your head to try to make sure that you follow everything accordingly. But then after a while, it just becomes habitual, and then there's no you doing anything. It's just a habitual thing that's happening. And maybe it's focusing more on the you part of this than on the actual form.
So for instance, the person he's talking to may have thought, well, I need to offer incense. I need to bow to the Buddha. I need to repent. I need to do chants. I need to do this. And the question is, well, why do you need to do that? Well, I need to do that in order to really be having a proper practice and so forth. It's not Buddhism if I don't do that. That kind of thing would be the answer. When Dogen was in China, he ran into apparently a few at least, cooks of the monasteries who were buying stuff, and he had these exchanges with these cooks in China, and brought back a lot of attitude adjustment from them. And in the one case, he was studying some scrolls and stuff. The story was that last night he was there, he copied 300 koans to bring back. And he was apparently in one of these studying modes when this cook noticed what he's doing. He said, what are you doing there? He said, I'm studying the Dharma. And he said, what's the use of that? He said, well, I need to understand the Dharma so I can help other people. Well, what's the use of that? And a couple other, what's the use of that? Finally, the cook says, no, what's the long-term use of that? And Dogen said, I realized he was right. There's all the stories I'm telling myself, all the reasons I have for doing this don't really make any sense. So there must be another purpose for my doing this, or a use of this that I'm not getting. And he's seeing that I'm not getting the true use or the true purpose.
I say, I'm really surprised that the translators are able to take the same word and get teacher and counselor.
Well, not only that, but all these phrases that these guys are quoting, and that they're not even in the other one, or they're all condensed somehow.
It seems, it just doesn't seem appropriate in the context of talking about transmission.
Well,
Like,
good counselor, I think it's appropriate, especially in lay practice, because as I often say, I think of what we do as so-called Zen priests is not priestcraft. It's not like a Catholic priest or something, but we're like coaches. You know, we're trying to help other people do the same thing, do thou likewise kind of thing. But his last teaching, you know, don't take my word for this. So I think good counselor, and I'm pretty sure Dogen was indicating something like that in some of the other articles. When you meet a good counselor, I mean, Kalyana Mitra means good friend. Chishiki, Brian's name, means good friend. This means somebody who's interested in your practice and not getting in the way of that, not distorting it, helping you with it. So a good counselor has appropriate connotations. If you take the original Sanskrit or Japanese or Chinese word, it's probably going to have like 25 English words that are connotations of it. That makes sense. Anybody else so far?
Let's see, I recall you recently noting that some of these readings can be approached as like owner's manuals.
Yeah, like documentation for an application.
Right.
Computer, if
Only
you're
if
not
you're-
doing the application.
Only if you're involved with the desire to use the
Yeah.
product or the application.
Right.
Is such a,
It doesn't make
So-
any sense otherwise.
what is this, again, assuming our intention is, I mean, don't read this unless you're interested in what ultimate freedom or.
As he mentions, this says, when you meet a master without engaging in incense offering, bowing, chanting Buddha's name, repentance, or reading scripture, which is what you're getting at, you should just wholeheartedly sit. So this means once you're in the hands of a good counselor, then you have the living Dharma, you have the living Zen. Theoretically, I don't think Dogen's patting himself on the back here. He's just saying his teacher, Nyojo's teacher, and so forth. Once you're in, if you're learning to build a Steinway grand piano, which I understood is done in apprentice mode, where the master is there cutting a piece of wood, you stand next to them and watch what they do, and you try to cut that piece of wood the same way he's cutting it. There's no conversation. This is what I've been told. So you go from apprentice to journeyman to master until where you can build a whole Steinway piano, right? So I understand the transmission to be like that. You have to have the flexibility of mind to imitate your teacher in the beginning, but there comes a point in your life where you can no longer imitate your teacher. You have to have the flexibility of mind to innovate now, especially when it comes to skillful means. And I mean, Matsuoka Roshi never did this kind of thing. You know, this is stuff we've evolved in the interim, ways of doing this. So when he says without reading scriptures, he's saying that you've got the living Zen right in your face. You know, you can set the books aside for now. Maybe after your master dies, you might go back to reading some of his things. There was one guy in history, which is really hilarious. I came across this in the Shambhala dictionary, which Alex, you said that you've been reading that. And this successor to a great teacher who wrote the first book on koans, I can't remember the Blue Cliff, it wasn't Book of Serenity, Blue Cliff. It was so well done that everybody thought, this is it. Here's the Bible. And, you know, everybody's studying like this. So his student, his successor, gathered up as many of those as he could possibly find and burned them. Now that would be like my burning all of Matsuoka's books, you know, send them all back. So that tells you the importance, you know, that's placed not only on direct experience, your direct experience, but if you're practicing with somebody who theoretically has experience, he's represents the application. He's the online guru, what do we call the tech, he's the techie. you're working with a techie already. You don't need the documentation on the application. In my case, I recommend both. You need to keep studying this.
Well, it's essential that I convey to you what my ultimate intention is.
Yep.
And if my ultimate intention sort of like is in the ballpark of what Zen can offer, then you would
Yep.
suggest I practice this
Yes.
Genjokoan.
Yes. So again, on the personal level, they're saying you don't need this, actually. You already know this, or you can find this out directly. But on the social level, if you open up a Zen group and people are coming in the door, the first thing is going to be, how do I sit? So we teach people how to sit. We're training the trainers, right? The second thing is going to be somewhere down the road. Shouldn't we be reading something or something? Shouldn't we? Right? Dharma. So that practice leader, that teacher, needs to have some familiarity with and needs to be able to recommend what somebody might read. Like you were reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, right? Right? And that would be one we would recommend. But then the teacher, if somebody comes to them, and I've been reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and Suzuki says this here, and that sounds crazy to me, needs to be able to respond to that kind of question. So again, all these things that are listed here are really skillful means, social engagement in establishing the practice. You personally don't need them, right? But in a community, you need them. We need a lot of things in community that we don't need on our own.
Pursuit of mastery. The pursuit of mastery. Because I think on some level things are changing so quickly. A pursuit of mastery from a baby boomer's perspective versus a pursuit of mastery from Gen Z.
From what was the last one?
Gen Z, the new generation,
Okay.
earlier than the millennials, the new generation, which is the first generation that grew up with smartphones.
Right.
And the idea, to me, is becoming a much more vast crevasse.
Right.
And how to teach it. I mean, what is your experience of these two generational gaps? And certainly they're
Right.
filled in.
Well, as Reed was saying, we were talking when everybody was coming in. He works in that nether world of programming and coding and so forth. It's all invisible. I mean, you see the results on the interface on the screen, but other than that, it's very mysterious. And mastery of that is something that I guess you can teach to some degree. You can teach, but I think it's like everything else. It's walk before you run, crawl before you walk, sit and learn. How to sit before you crawl. You get up off your crib before you sit. There's an infinite regression back to where does it really start? And the claim I make is that we don't master Zen; it masters us. You have to give yourself over to it. And if you look at what's going on in all of those training functions, you're an artist. You paint with oil, mostly acrylic, all media. So what do? How do you master that?
Surrender to it to some extent. I agree. I think to claim mastery is to some extent a false claim, but I think it is quite possible to claim the pursuit of mastery.
Right.
I think
and how does
the word pursuit
yeah,
is where my
then there's some social questions around, like how do you know you're a master? Like people are self-claimed artists, and in the world of art and music and all those performing arts and everything, it doesn't matter that you call yourself this and while you're waiting tables. You know, it's when you're recognized as an artist that you become what society accepts as true artistry, right? There's a certain, and it's a social kind of thing. It's not a personal thing. You don't anoint yourself a Zen priest. You don't anoint yourself an artist, right? But what point I'm getting at is process. The way you master your medium is by paying attention to it. You see what it does when you do this. And, oh, I'm not going to do that again. That was a mistake. I got to throw this whole sheet of paper away now, right? And it costs $5, whatever. So you master it by trial and error, fall down 7 times, get up 8, and hard knocks, right? But eventually, that's less and less and less and less, and you're in harmony with the medium. And it's flowing, it's working, right? The next time you start a painting, it's not as terrifying as the first painting you started.
I mean, to some extent, you create a relationship.
Yeah.
You need
So look at the medium we're mastering in meditation. It's your own mind. Bodhidharma said, watch what your mind is doing. Pay attention to your mind. So we're immersing ourselves in this field of consciousness, which we think, oh, we know all about that. It's been there from the beginning.
If I parallel,
We don't.
If I parallel that to painting, literally would almost, in my brain, would sound like I'm creating a relationship with my own mind.
Yes. So that you can observe it scientifically. And you admit that the separation isn't there, but for purposes of observation, so we pay attention to the senses. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? Right? And you sit still. The key here is we sit still. Fixed gaze. The more still we sit, the more it moves. So Buddha taught that the mind imposes a false stillness on reality. Why would it do that? Because I have to know if that thing is charging me or running away from me, right? To survive. I can't just have this all be a blur because I'm not going to last long, right? So the monkey mind imposes this false stillness. So the more still you sit, the more that filter or that restraint is removed. So you it's almost like a regression. You could think of it as going back to the oceanic awareness of the crib. LSD experience, LSD, those psychedelics release this kind of filtering mechanism that allows you to see all the sense data that's flowing. You don't know what to make of it. You're watching your hand move through the air and everything. But it brings you into a different time, different relationship to time and to your own mind, to your own consciousness. So what we're doing is pushing the envelope when we're sitting in Zazen. We're making ourselves sit still. That's very abnormal. Something has to give. Eventually what has to give is your ordinary perception of what you think you know about your own reality has to give. It's all projected. You're a psychiatrist, so you're more familiar with this
You
term.
say that like I know something.
But I mean, we start talking about the mind, it seems to be the field of psychiatry. But from a Zen perspective, it's not. That's your world. It's not a specialty. Okay? Do we have time to do any more, or are we done?
We got 10 minutes, 12 minutes.
Let's try one more. Okay, the last one, if you remember, was from the first time you meet a master without engaging in incense offering, bowing, chanting Buddha's name, repentance, or reading scripture, you should just wholeheartedly sit and thus drop away body and mind. Right? So continuing. When even for a moment you express the Buddha's seal in the 3 actions by sitting upright in samadhi, the whole phenomenal world becomes the Buddha's seal, and the entire sky turns into enlightenment. Very poetic, right?
One more time.
When even for a moment you express the Buddha's seal by sitting upright in samadhi, the whole phenomenal world becomes the Buddha's seal, and the entire sky turns into enlightenment. Would sooner than better. Sooner than better. So after the initial meeting with a good counselor, well, I'm sorry. If a human being, even for a single moment, manifests the Buddhist posture in the three forms of conduct, while that person sits up straight in samadhi, the entire world of Dharma assumes the Buddhist posture, and the whole of space becomes the state of realization. So here what do you hear him doing there? And then maybe what are some of the contrasts?
So it seems as though the sitting upright or assuming the posture, as it were, might transcend just the posture that we take in Zazen. That seems to be the similarity that I'm drawing between those two translations.
Mhm. Mhm.
Something as though maybe it's not so much a physical posture as though it is an attitude.
Well, yeah, it certainly would affect your attitude. I think of it as a sweet spot in the middle of the posture. Like the drum over there has a sweet spot. When you hit it, it sounds perfect sound, right? When you hit that sweet spot, this kind of transformation is what that is implied by that. Like coming into alignment with gravity on the simplest level. But what is the implication of being in total balance? Being in complete physical balance means you also have to be in complete mental, emotional balance, or spiritual balance, if you will. Eventually, social balance. The reason Zen folks seem to be able to get along with others is they're kind of in their own bubble, yes, but they're very balanced in that bubble, right? They're okay. So the implications of this coming into this physical samadhi are profound. Somebody said when you touch the tanden or when you sit on the tanden, it's as if you're immersed in a field of energy. Transformation. Now, some scholars and even practitioners argue there's no great transcendental spiritual configuration or kind of transformation. No evidence in history of that, which I disagree with. But what it is exactly and what it means, its implications can be debated, forever. The fundamental point is whether you experience it or not. And a lot of us are afraid that we can trick ourselves into something like that. We can be wrong. And Buddhism certainly holds that you can mistake what is Daisetsu Suzuki called a false samadhi for the real thing. And the only comfort zone you can find in that is just don't give up, don't assume that no matter how dramatic it is, the whole world becomes a Buddhist seal, the entire sky turns into enlightenment, that you're done, that's it. You have to assume that was a peak in the tent, but there's no end to this, and it goes deeper.
Buddha kept practicing. Buddha kept practicing.
Yeah. Both for himself and for others. I mean, there was still the social aspect was in there, but he had to clarify this matter for himself. He didn't have a teacher to help him clarify it. Are we good? Well, let's go around the room and just force everybody to say something again. Alex? Right. Got thumbs up. Terry?
Let's see, I can imagine someone coming to a Zen master and saying, I want to get enlightened.
Right.
I want to be enlightened. So then the counselor suggests, well, try this out. And then it's the Genjokoan. But yeah, something after the enlightenment, like what's the what's your intention now?
Right. What are you going to do with it? What good is it? So here, remember, he's not talking to a newcomer. You know, he wouldn't say this to a newcomer. He's saying this to people who've been practicing and burning incense and doing all this stuff for years and years and years, you know.
Like why do people like decide to receive do they decide to receive the transmission, or do they does it
You
just
cannot
happen?
decide to receive the transmission of the method, nor can you decide to receive the transmission of the Buddha Dharma. You either do or you don't. It can't be something that you just will into being.
Is it something that's already there?
It's something that's already there.
But if people have the intention of receiving it, isn't that sort of already mistaken?
In a way, that's what's meant by the term Buddha seeking Buddha. You have to admit that wherever this intention is coming from, I can't take credit for it.
How do you know that it's not your own selfish desires?
You don't. Those two cannot be separated. In this world of suchness, there is neither self nor other than self, is the way it's stated. We have to give up those kind of ideas that you can be selfless. Michael, anything?
Yeah, I'm done upon the illusion of wants and needs.
Wants and needs.
Yes, wants and needs. Do I need to sit? Do I want to sit? The purpose of it all. And to some extent, I think as I continue to practice, I feel the need, and then as time has gone forward, then I want to fulfill the need. And the wants and the needs start to just elusively become the same.
Now, once you start experiencing some of the effect, and the word I wanted to use in your first questions were about talking about the effect, you know, and we hesitate to use that kind of language because we don't like to indulge or confuse ourselves with the idea of linear cause and effect. If I sit in Zazen, I will get enlightened as the result of the cause. You know, that will be the effect. But nonetheless, we speak of the effect of Zazen. And there are many different levels of it. And once you start to experiencing some of what you might call the benefits, where you are calmer, you are less crazy, less anxious, right? For some reason, you don't worry about the things you used to worry about so much obsessively and so on. Even physical health benefits. I attribute my health pushing 80 to my practice of Zen, because I haven't done much else to take care of myself my whole life, you know. So once you begin to suspect that, it's just like the first time you read a book, like Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. This sounds like what I've been talking about all along, right? This sounds, yeah, this is what it is. This is it. It's kind of like that. When you start practicing, you start getting that sense that, yeah, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. This is what and again, back to the point, it's not you looking for it according to Buddhism, it's Buddha looking for it. Buddha simply means awake, the awakened one. Buddha means to wake up or wake. Buddha means the awakened one. So it's as if the true intent of our existence is to wake up. We want to wake up. Everything that is sentient wants to wake up, right? And Buddhism premise is that we're still asleep. We think we're awake. We're relatively awake. We're not as asleep as we were when we were sleeping last night, right? And we can wake up more. And just as we know the difference between what it was like to be asleep and what it's like to be awake now, when we wake up more, we will know the difference just as clearly. So for Buddha, we imagine him having this experience, and everybody else in the room is like a zombie, right? Everybody else is sleepwalking. He's the only one fully awake, and he can see it. That makes sense? So the intent is not my intent. The intent that we fulfill through this practice is not really ours. It's just like the intent that we fulfill through pursuing a mate and marriage and sex and having babies is not really ours. It's the species, right? Schopenhauer, the species wants to have that hybrid child. And that's why you opposites attract and so forth genetically. Everything, we think it's what we want. And then once we get it, it could go either way, right? Sometimes what we get in life is not what we wanted. And so in the same case in Zen, what we think we're after, it can't really be what we're after. And we are not after it. It is after itself. Okamura Roshi said, we, human beings, and all sentient beings to some degree, are the universe wanting to be aware of itself. How else does this awareness exist other than through consciousness, through sentient beings, right? And so we see a spectrum of sentience from the earthworm on up or earthworm on down and so forth. That's all this so-called Buddha nature. And then the new Dharma Bite I'm writing about, I'm calling into question, what's the difference between that and Christ nature or God nature, really, other than semantics? To be aware, to be awake. So I think Zen questions whether that's really our intent. Or you might as well say, that is the intent, but it's not mine. I don't own that intent. Enough on that? Too much on it? Anything, Brendan? Okay, good. Read. Taylor.
Yes.
Zena. Zena, your first three letters of your name.
Yeah, my parents pretty good. Two things that come to mind in this talk is to plug in the book club, because we actually are covering a book on intent. And I'm bad with titles, but I believe it's
Stepping out of self-deception.
Okay, is it Rodney Smith? I believe. So just the author. So
This is the Monday night.
Monday
We're
night.
just starting it this week. Yeah.
We just
Take
started.
care.
It's just there's just so much parallel about what we've been
Did you
talking
choose the
about.
book?
I threw it out as an option. Then we chose it.
You're in trouble.
We chose between 6. Yeah,
You're in trouble now.
I am. Yeah.
Not you, them.
And then two, I do this quirky thing of relating songs to themes, and especially in discussions. But I know we spoke earlier about Rolling Stones, but for some reason you can't always get
What
you
you
want.
need.
You always get what you need. And so
If you try sometime.
If you try. Yes, exactly. So
That's Zazen.
that's all.
That's great.
That's good.
Okay, well, let's do the closing. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Karmic gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to continue the Buddha ways unsurpassable. I vow to realize. Thank you for your attention,
Thank you for your
patience.
teaching.
Thank you to Brennan for
Yeah,
on
Brennan.
today. What's your Dharma name?
Bonto,
Wampo means
the 10,000 things, myriad things.
your Dharma name?
Suki, for moon,
Suki.
as total function.
Moon is Senki.
Chico, true self.
Lisa.
Ufa.